Hello, everybody, and welcome to Siblings Spotlights with Shayla. And yeah, do you want to just start by introducing who you are, a bit of your story?
Sure. My name is Shayla. I sound different because I'm American. I am 39 years old and I live in Rochester, New York, which is the opposite side of New York State from New York City, which is a common misconception. I've lived here all of my life. I am the oldest of 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls, and I am married with my wonderful husband, not living with my family.
Wonderful. And yeah, as you mentioned, one of 4 siblings. Your obviously younger brother Aaron had Duchenne.
He did.
What was it like growing up as a Duchenne sibling? I think that's always the best place to start. The first question people always ask, isn't it?
Also, there's 4 of you. That's a busy house.
Oh, very. It was funny when I met my husband. I didn't know how to cook for less than 6 people, so quite scary.
But you knew how to cook.
I did try. I think. So I was 4.5 when my brother Aaron was born, and I had been an only child up until then and had a pretty normal childhood. Aaron was about 18 months old. He wasn't walking yet, and so my parents knew something was different. So they took him to the doctor, and I don't know the details of what was involved with getting diagnosed and whatnot, but I knew something was different because he walked on his tiptoes, and he wasn't running. So I was about, I think it was about 3 years later, I think he was formally diagnosed. I was 8 years old, and there's 4.5 years between us. So I was 8 when he was diagnosed. All I remember was my parents telling me that something was wrong with his legs and that his muscles were going to be weak. And I honestly don't remember more than that. Maybe it was because I was 8, maybe because it was so different. But my parents really tried to give me a normal childhood, as normal as could be. When he was first diagnosed, there weren't really any modifications that needed to be made, or we didn't really need to do anything different. So visually, he was just a normal sibling who could walk. When he was about 7, it was November of 1991. He was 7. He was voting with my mom. Into the voting booth, he would help tick the little buttons down, and then went home and went into a manual wheelchair the next day. And that was the last time that he walked.
Oh, really?
I remember that.
Was
It wasn't a gradual thing then?
It was very gradual. Yeah, he had
gradual too then.
Yeah, he had a lot of physical therapy, a lot of occupational therapy, stretching, leg braces to stretch out his hamstrings so that he could continue to walk as long as possible. We had, when he was still walking, my uncle built some steps that were not as high, and they would gradually go out so that he could still walk up the stairs and feel like he was independent. So
I love those stories of like the things that would get done, the little modifications and the little I don't know, to me they're just little memories of care, like you know, but in a very unique way, because other people didn't have those kind of memories, or those ramps that they had to get out, or the modifications that were made. Wow, gosh. So you were about 11, 12 at the time, and had you obviously seen that coming, and how did that change your life, your way of seeing things?
I honestly don't remember, and they may have happened, I just don't remember them, conversations with my parents. I do remember when I went into 3rd grade, I was 9, I was 8.5. So about 6 months after he was diagnosed, my mom had made my teacher aware of what was going on. Just so if I was different, she could help my mom see me from a different perspective. So I remember my teacher talking to me and just saying, you know, if you ever need help with anything, let me know. And I was always a really good student. I was very studious. I loved to read. And I didn't really have any issues in school. I do remember when I was in 5th grade, he was in 1st grade. And he was riding the school bus with me. And so we would ride the bus together. We would sit in the front seat. And then we were the first ones off of the school bus once we got to school. And I had special permission to walk him to his classroom. And then I would go to my classroom because they were obviously in the same building. So I was usually late to class, which my teacher she didn't care at all. But I do remember the music teacher, and I don't have many people on my short list, but she was on my short list. She don't want to, especially, but because he was walking slower, he'd walk on his tiptoes. It was very visual. And the music teacher said to him, I think with good intention, but I already didn't care for her at that point. She said, oh, come on, you can walk faster than that. And I just remember looking at her and not knowing what to say because I was in shock, but I wanted to protect my brother. So I just looked at her and said, come on, we have to go. So I walked him to class, went to school the whole day, got home, and I burst into tears. I held it in all day. And my mom said, what is the matter? And I told her, and she got on that phone so quick and called the music teacher and gave her some choice words. And I mean, one of them was, don't you ever say anything like that to a child again, because you never know what's going on. And we don't owe you an explanation as to why he's walking on his tiptoes.
I remember, do you know what? That reminds me so much of an experience, because everything you said is very similar to what I went through as well. I think we went through a very similar thing, especially with our ages and stuff like that. I think the only difference is there's just under 3 years between me and my brother, and more like 4 between you and yours. But I had an experience where my brother used to do that thing, you know, when they do that thing where they try and lift themselves off the floor, and they do that thing where they put the hands down and then they straighten their legs and then they stand up. And we used to, what we used to do at that point is we used to just take him and help him stand up, because we were like, we you know, he's struggling to stand at that point, and if he can use that energy to walk, we'd rather him use that energy to get to where he wants to get to rather than just getting up. And I remember the amount of people that used to say to me, let him do it, he can do it. And I went, and it was like, even at 10 years old, I wanted to scream at him, no, because if he does that bit, he then can't do that bit later. But at 10, you don't want to say those things. And I think it's a really interesting thing where they talk about how Duchenne siblings have an emotional intelligence. And I think it's from scenarios like that, where we're not medical doctors, we don't understand this condition, we can't give you all the jargon, but we do understand that thinking that you're going to let that kid do it is going to make them better. It's not, it's actually going to make it worse for them later on. They're going to be more tired.
It's funny that you say that though, Hazel, because my first thought was, oh, Hazel, should you have done that? And then that comes to me where I then think through probably having been told as a child, don't do that, do that. And I think the thing is, it's probably well-meaning to say, oh, you know, to intervene in those situations. But the reality of the fact is that you were just a sister with your brother, you know, doing something that was totally rational and logical to you from your perspective. And I think people, maybe it's something that is sort of unique, a thing to sibling perspective in this manner, is sort of discounting that what you were going through as your brother was picking himself up, and you were trying to help him do that. It was discounting how you felt for how he felt.
I don't know about your situation, but it wasn't just me that did it. Like, my parents would do it and family members would do it, but people from the outside looking in, because they, like, I think people, it wasn't just me. I think it's not just a sibling thing, but I think it's understanding the condition and it's understanding the progressiveness of it, if you like.
I think part of it too is people from the outside, or those who aren't as involved in the day-to-day, are trying to help and they're not quite sure how to. And so it's almost natural to say, oh, well, if you try this, and it's almost not, well, it's not a bad intention, but at the same point, you just want to scream, hush, because I got it. We do this, we know what we're doing, just mind your own business.
That's interesting. So it seems like you're even trying to reason with the music teacher that she might have been, you know, she might have been saying it with, like, to try and get his efforts up. Then it is a really tough situation, isn't it? Because the world is so different to everyone in all of that. And I think that probably is one thing that you learn as a Duchenne sibling in that manner, is, and maybe you feel that, perseverance, because you have to think, okay, well, you're way out of line there, but I'll just let that one pass. One thing, memory that does strike in me that was similar is, and I think I'm okay saying this, because it wasn't too bad. The thing that's worse, but you know, the thing this guy said, right? We were walking. I was in secondary school. Andrew was still in primary school, and so I was in the lower end of secondary school. And we were walking, I was part of choir, and we were walking into town one day to sing at something, I don't know. And as we were walking, we passed my old primary school. And you could see all the kids out on the playground, like playing out on the field. And as we're walking over this, like the bridge, long kind of road, one of the kids is looking out, and I'm quiet, didn't have many friends type kid, and so I'm not really talking that much, but they're all talking amongst each other as we're walking. And one of the kids goes, oh, look, they've got a wheelchair kid in their school. Not even like laughing at it, nasty, but kind of like it was like a fun thing, like that's a wheelchair kid. And
that's a unique situation to have a kid in a wheelchair in a school. That's cool.
It was clearly not something he had, and you know, he's a 13-year-old lad, and I probably hadn't said anything the entire walk, and I just said, that's my brother. and I didn't even say, like, that's my brother. How dare you say that? I didn't say. It was just like, that is my brother. and everyone just went quiet, and they just moved on, and nothing was said about it. And again, I think that goes back to what you said about your music teacher. Like, there's an element of perseverance where you think, okay, that person said that thing, and I'll know him now as the guy who said that thing, you know. But it's just the thing. Everyone says different things, and of course there are things where people say where you get angry, but there are things also where you learn to sort of internalize those emotions. I don't know if I'm not saying either is better. I don't know at this stage in life, but you know, I certainly know which path I took more often than not.
I think it's certainly, as a Duchenne sibling, and when you're that young as well, because you were young. If you were 12, then you're still very young, aren't you?
Yeah.
But you kind of realize that people have a perspective that is different to yours. It's almost like you think, well, everyone thinks the same as me, don't they? And very quickly you go, oh no, they don't. They have a very different thinking.
There is something that I'll just say on that note, is that like I think that the Duchenne experience is one particular thing, and it is not discounted. It's very much spoken about. But then I think one thing that people often forget is that the siblings' experience is almost sometimes mirrored image of that thing. It's almost a shadow of that thing, and so therefore I remember one sibling once saying to me that people often didn't realize that when their brother was going through certain things in life, in some way, they were going through them too. Whenever anybody said anything, they were saying it to them as well, because of how this person felt. And I think obviously that varies differently, but I think that's something that there's credit to it, I think.
It makes sense. And I mean, the example with the music teacher was the first time that I remember being with my brother when I heard somebody say what I felt was offensive. And I think that's what caught me in my tracks, or stopped me in my tracks. I was a very shy kid in high school. And I, came out of my shell, but it was just a moment of shock in realizing that, okay, teachers are people, and sometimes they say things that aren't okay. I just remember feeling very defensive of my brother and very protective. And that's why when she said it, I immediately felt that ball of emotion that I just wanted to cry, because I was so upset that he heard that. It was but it was him that heard that, and I couldn't do anything. So when a couple of years later, my family and I were somewhere, and my mom and my dad always taught us to never stare at people who are different. And it can be hard sometimes, because if something's out of the ordinary to you, I think it's a natural intuition to want to looking and staring are different. But we were somewhere, and my brother was in a wheelchair at the time, and some kids were looking at my brother and said they were just staring at him, and real nasty, because I didn't have a filter yet. Were just staring at him, and I said, real nasty. I said, it's not nice to stare, and if you have any questions, ask us. And my mom said, shut up. No,
not a real thing in a way. Shut it down.
I love that.
Oh, I got punished, but
but you know what? The amount of kids, and I'm saying kids like they were young kids, but the amount of kids that would just go up to Darren and go, "What's wrong with you then? What's wrong with your leg? Why are you in a chair?" And they're so blunt, but they're not being nasty. They just want to know. And Darren would go, "Oh, my legs don't work and my muscles aren't very good." And they went, oh, "Okay, bye," and that was it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think you can learn a lot as an adult from a kid, and that bluntness, because they don't know how to be anything else other than what they think and what they want to know. So they just say it.
It was a teachable moment for my parents and I on it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And my dad has been my dad's motto since I was little. He doesn't do it all the time, but it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And he was right, especially in that situation, because I think I had built myself up that I had to be this protective big sister and do whatever it takes to protect my brother. And there was this situation in front of my face where people were staring, and you're not supposed to stare at people who are different. And it just came out very nasty. And I never did it again, but I would, whisper to people, because not to make them feel embarrassed, hoping they have the best intentions. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask, as opposed to just staring.
But do you think there was an element of what I sort of touched on a minute ago about that idea that they were staring at you as well as your brother? Like, and I think there is that element within us. See, I take myself back to those times, and I remember being on my brother's side, like, I'm not having them staring at him. But also maybe as a 12-year-old, you're thinking, I don't really want them staring at me. Do you know what I mean? It's because, you know, the family, that sibling connection in that sense is, if you're staring at him, you're staring at me, you know, that even on that level.
Yeah. And I went through growing pains at 12, just personally. I mean, 12 for young boys and girls is a very hard age, with hormones and puberty and self-esteem and other kids. And I was very self-conscious, and my brother was very self-conscious in a very different way. So it was like, if they're staring at him, they're staring at me, and I don't want people staring at him or staring at me.
Yeah, there are so many different aspects to it, aren't there? You mentioned about protective and that idea of being protective. Do you feel that's something that started or starts in a sibling journey from quite a young age in much heightened ways than with other people?
I did. And I've always been a very independent person, and have always been very nurturing. And I don't think that being protective can be taught. It's something that you are, or you learn to be. And I think, especially, you know, speaking for our situation and being a sibling of somebody with Duchenne, is you learn to be protective. Not necessarily, I mean, maybe in some cases because you want to, but you almost have to be, because there are certain aspects that my brother couldn't protect himself, and I felt that it was my job to do that. And it almost was, and I had to do that from 8 years old, and it was something that I felt I needed to do at 8 years old. And I almost took on a second parent role, not only to my brother, but to our other two siblings, because my parents were so busy caring for Aaron that it's like, okay, I can protect him by taking care of my other siblings so that my parents can do what they need to for him. So it was a very convoluted relationship growing up that my family never spoke about. We just sort of settled into these roles.
Yeah.
And do you think being the older sibling, because me and Pete have this discussion as well about, there is a difference, we think, between being a sibling that's younger and being a sibling that's older. Because you were the older one, and your younger two siblings were younger than Aaron. Correct. Did they also have that protective element with the relationship with Aaron, or not? None.
Not at all. And I think that part of it was because I saw the transition from, from him, coming home from the hospital to not walking correctly at 18 months, and then ultimately being diagnosed and seeing him go into a wheelchair, where by the time my other brother was born, Aaron was already in a wheelchair. So for them, they only ever knew him being in a wheelchair. So that's just how he got around. There wasn't any other way. So that's
exactly what I have said in the past. Obviously, I'm not qualified to do any sort of analysis on anything, but one thing that I've always looked at is the idea that if you're the eldest and your brother's younger, then you have known some form of order before, before you had to deal with, before your brother had to deal with, and your family had to deal with Duchenne as it is. Whereas somebody who's born after that or around the same time as that, it's all they've ever known. And I don't think it necessarily makes it harder, easier, different, different in any particular way. But I think there is always a difference with knowing something different, and having that marker of transition point in your life than for it to always have been there. And I think that does definitely affect people in different ways, I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on from that, your brother going into middle school, high school, were you still, did you stay close after that as you grew up, got into your kind of later teens?
I think our relationship started to change because we weren't in the same school building anymore. What did really connect us in school, though, was he seemed to have a lot of the same teachers that I did. So the teachers were already familiar with the fact that I had a brother who had a disability, and then they were able to meet him and get to know him as a student. So that was different. And my brother would always say, I can't do anything bad because you were such a good student. And I'm like, mm-hmm.
Wow. but did he do anything bad? Because my brother was the naughty one in school. I was the super good one.
I wouldn't. No, he wasn't mischievous or anything. He was, and it runs in the family. He was very sassy. And he learned to speak up for himself. And I remember in middle school, which would have been the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, I don't remember which year it was, but he, so generally speaking, if a student has a physical disability, they go into a special physical education class or gym class. So my parents fought for him to be in the regular gym class, knowing full well that physically he couldn't engage like the other students, but there were still things that he could do to be involved. And the reason they pushed for that was because mentally he was fine. There was no disability at all. So they didn't want him to become depressed or fall back being around students that weren't at the same level as he was. So in gym class, the teacher felt that he should be in the adaptive gym class, and it wasn't her prerogative to make that decision or not. She was the gym teacher. So my brother had an aide in school at the time, and she said to my brother, she put a basketball in his hands and she said, you need to shoot a basket. And he looked at her and he said, I can't. And she said, I know. That's why you need to be in the adaptive gym class. And my brother was never mouthy to people. He was mouthy about people out of their range of hearing. So apparently when they left, the gym teacher was behind him and his aide left the gym before him to open the door so he could get out in his wheelchair. Aaron went out, the teacher was right behind him. The aide let go of the door and my brother swung around in his wheelchair and slammed the door in her face.
Nice.
And
that's brilliant.
It's like, who are you to say anything? Just, it's not your decision. And you don't need to be right. You don't get a sticker for being right. I mean, this is the decision that my parents made. And the gym teacher that he ended up having was wonderful. And my brother was the manager and would help with equipment and help with coaching and just touched on his strengths as opposed to what he couldn't do.
I love this is just like Hazel's story of her brother who was the cricket umpire. Yes.
Like Darren was sports bonkers. Like they're good at sport, and then there's being absolutely obsessed with it. And he loved, the only sport he didn't like was golf, which is understandable. Everything else, oh God. But everything else he loved, and he loved cricket. Absolutely loved it. And because a lot of my family play cricket, what they done is he learned what the umpire does, effectively, like equal to like a referee in the game, if you like. And he learned all the hand signals, because cricket is a really complicated game. There's a reason why it's 5 days long. Yeah. So so he learned, and and he used to like umpire games and used to help out, you know, with the family matches and stuff. And so that touches on something that I'm familiar with, which is if they love sport, and a lot of people out there with Duchenne love their sport, they still want to be involved in it. And it's a great way of getting involved. Let them be involved in the management of it, like you said. And good on that. What was the name of that gym teacher? That's such a cool thing to do.
Oh, no, hang on. The gym teacher didn't let him. We can't out her.
There was a
okay.
face of, and then there was, I want to say it was Coach Puccio, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But he was always a good guy.
Okay. Well, we can leave their names
what
in
did
there.
Darren do later on then? So as he got older and he went through school, what did he do after school? Did he move on? Did he continue with his education? Like what were his interests?
I'm trying to remember, because I was away in college then. He passes online, that I do remember. And my parents never, they pushed me to go to college, but they didn't push him to go to college. And I don't know if it's because physically the assistance that he would need, or if it wasn't for him. And, you know, college isn't for everybody. And he really wanted to, and he was never lazy. But he also was very focused on sports from a very young age. I mean, your football is to England, American football.
Yeah.
And so my brother grew up in an American football household, and you live, eat, breathe, wash, rinse, repeat American football. I didn't get that gene, but that's fine. But he had this ability, and I think it's because he was starting to lose, his muscle tone was decreasing and he was losing other functions. So his other senses kicked in, and he's always had the most amazing memory. And he bought a couple of TVs. They were 63 inches each. We called them the twins, in his bedroom. And each TV could split into 4 different channels at one time. So he would watch 16 different things at one time. And he couldn't physically use the remote control anymore, but he had the whole remote control memorized. And so he would tell either his nurse or his aide or any of us that were with him, push this, and we're like, we can't even find the stupid button, and you've got it in your head. And he's like, hurry up. And it's like, I can't find the button. But he was just as happy being at home. Like I said, he took 1 or 2 online classes. It wasn't for him. And he focused on sports, and he thought about going to school for like coaching, or I'm sure there's a more formal name for it, but he was very happy at home. He did not want to move out. He did not want to move into a group home, we call them, where people with disabilities, it's one place that they can live and have around the clock care. He was very, very happy being at home, and we didn't push him to do something he didn't want to do.
I think that sounds really good, because I think sometimes in some families there can be kind of this pushing to always be doing something and always be doing like what next kind of thing. And I think that kind of calm atmosphere, I think that can be really, really helpful, can't it? Particularly, you know, if you have love, and if you're in a loving environment, then, you know, that's the most important thing, I feel. Is there anything that you wish had been different, maybe about I don't know, society, the kind of the way things were for him? Anything that any troubles that, you know, for him after the age of 18 that you kind of you know, think could have been made easier?
I mean, definite. So our mom, I forget when, but she became a nurse. And she became
While
a
he
nurse.
was in his the Duchenne journey.
Became a nurse. She went back to school, became a nurse, and she became a nurse to learn more about his care and learn more about how to take care of him from a medical perspective. The amount of medical knowledge that my mom especially has is amazing. I mean, to the point where some of my brother's doctors would talk to her. It was crazy. It's like, don't you have the PhD? But she became the first parent in New York State to be paid to take care of their child as a nurse. And it was only because she was a nurse. So she sort of broke through that barrier for other parents. And she didn't care about what other parents did, but for her, that's what she wanted, because it was so hard for her to go back to work because the pay for nurses was so low and so sad that nurses would call off all the time. And if you don't work your shifts, you don't get paid. And my mom would have been fired from a job had she tried to get one, because nurses were calling off so often that she would have to call off. So that's part of the reason why she pushed New York State to pay her. And she had to abide by the same rules that other nurses did. But it allowed my mom to have a financial living. And my dad always worked full time, but it allowed her to have a financial living, knowing the care that my brother had. So, I mean, here in New York State, we have Medicaid, which is, I don't want to say a universal form of insurance because it's not, but there are different ways to become eligible for it. One of which is to have a disability. And I just wish that the rate of pay for nurses was higher, because it's so hard to find nurses that want to work for the rate that they're getting paid. Sorry, that's Malcolm. Says hello. When they can go somewhere else and get paid more for the same skill set.
Yeah. In terms of personal care, though, was your brother able to get personal care around the clock, or was it that your mum then took on that personal care for all of it?
According to the nursing assessments that he had for nursing, which were required, he was eligible for 24-hour care for nursing. We could not find nurses to cover 24 hours. There were spurts of time where we would get some nurses that, would work with him for a while and it was very steady. And there were other times where the nurses would call off back to back to back, and they were 8-hour shifts that my mom and my dad would stay up for 36 hours because they couldn't sleep because there was no nursing. Yeah. And what are they going to do? So it was like my mom would take a nap for 2 hours. My dad would stay up and do the care that he could. And then he would sleep or go to work. And then my mom would just stay up. I mean, they were absolute zombies. Yeah. And there was no way that my mom could have gotten a job outside of the house. There was absolutely no way.
As a Duchenne sibling, that must have taken its own impact on you a little bit emotionally. Did you feel emotionally invested in that? Did you feel you had to try and sort that out in some ways? Was that?
I didn't. I almost felt the opposite. I was almost resentful that the nurses were there caring for him. And I've to this day, I still can't put my finger on why, but I just remember never looking the nurses in the eye when because I would come home from school, never looking them in the eye. I mean, saying hello to them, but just never wanting to have a relationship with them. I don't know if it was that I felt like they were
doing your job.
Not necessarily doing my job, but like replacing our parents.
Okay. See, I was first surprised by what you said, but then I immediately remembered the first few years of my brother having care and how I felt. And for me, it felt like there's a stranger in my house. And And not only is there a stranger in my house, but they're like doing like intimate care for my brother, which is like, that's kind of like what I've been, what I help out with. And so it was so many different elements. One of the elements was like the annoyance of the bare fact that my brother needed that. The other was having elements of, anxiety of people around the place, that there are people in my house who I don't know, and it changes things, doesn't it? It took me a good few years to adapt to that, and I certainly empathize with those feelings. I don't know, Hazel, did you not feel that way at all?
Wow. I wasn't in the house, so Darren didn't get the carers. I left. I'd moved out.
But that was it. You moved out when you were 18, and I think that because I was coming back from university or whatever, or there were times when I was still there. And
this is the thing. I didn't do the uni thing. I never had that opportunity. I went to college and then I worked, and I moved out because I was working. So I'd come back at the weekends. We used to come back every weekend to see Darren and everything. And then they got carers in when Darren was 18, because there's something to do with funding as well. So when Darren turned, I want to say it was like 16 or 18 or something like that, when he turned 18, they could get funding for caring. They couldn't get funding for caring until he was a certain age. Now he needed this care before then, and once he got the carers in, it gave him a whole new lease of life, because at that point he wasn't at college anymore. Like you said, he couldn't work. It was a bit like thing, and these carers came in and it gave him a new lease of life. It really did. And then it allowed my parents to kind of take their lives back, because my mum is a teacher, so she was able to continue doing that, and my dad had his job going on. So yeah, it's a different thing for me, because I felt like it was desperately needed. And to the point where it was like, because Darren needed it. It wasn't whether we needed it or whether my parents needed it. You could see Darren needed it, and it gave him a new lease of life. And he had a social life because his carers became his mates. He had one guy who insisted that they went for a walk around the village and they'd always end up in the pub, or it became a social life for him, and it gave him a wonderful life that I don't think he would have had if they weren't there, because they offered him something that we couldn't.
I also think it's definitely a sort of an interesting perspective from Shayla's part as well, that I certainly sort of feel I definitely related to at times, through that element of, if you've been there as the protector, the one who sorts everything out, the leader throughout so many years, and then suddenly there's some rando coming in doing your leader job or whatever, like I think certainly at a young adolescent age, that is something that you do have to adapt to. And it's interesting because it's one of the things that I think is a little difficult for Duchenne siblings that I've never thought of before.
I was very hands-on with Aaron when he was younger. And how old was I? So he ended up, when he was in high school, he had a ventilator put on to help him breathe because his muscles were so weak. So there were two parts to the trach. There was the actual trach that went into his airway. And then there was what's called the inner cannula. It was like a straw that went inside of that. And so I learned how to change the inner cannula, and it's, not intimidating at all, just going into your brother's throat and pulling something out and putting it back in. But my parents showed me, because they wanted me to know in case of an emergency, how to change his trach. And that's something that we could do at home. And we had to, of course, wash our hands and wear gloves and had everything laid out, because you only had like 2 minutes to do it. So we had all the backup equipment and everything. So my brother was laying down and he's staring at me, and my mom's walking me through like how to do it and whatever. And I'm sweating, and I'm white. I am nervous because we're taking this whole thing out of his throat. And I look at my brother and he looks at me and he goes, "Don't mess up." And my mom said I lost all of my color, and we did the change real quick, and I was like, never again.
Wow.
That was the that we had back and forth.
Yeah.
You were close then. You were close with one another.
Yeah.
But was there, so that's interesting though, but what do you think was there any fear at all from other people coming in that they might not do it correctly, or would you have just had absolute trust?
No, I mean, the nurses that came in, even though they were nurses, I mean, his care was so individualized that my mom would absolutely do the training with them to make sure that they knew. We had to have an ambu bag hanging up on the wall just in case the ventilator stopped working for some reason. And, there were some nurses like, "Oh, we don't need that." My mom's like, "Oh, yes, you do." Because if the machine stops and he's dependent on that to breathe, you have to breathe for him. So my mom, she would fire plenty of nurses because they were either too pompous or egotistical or just weren't getting it, and she couldn't risk that. I mean, she'd go weeks without going out to the mailbox in front of our house because she had to be right there for my brother.
If we just talk about briefly sort of the end of your brother's life, did you say he was in his mid to late 20s when?
Yeah, he was
27.
Okay. Was that something that you, from your perspective as a sibling, did you feel, I mean, obviously you can never be prepared for in every way, but was it something that came out the blue, took you by surprise, or did you feel that your journey had brought you to that point? Was it as it could have been, really?
I think so. I mean, he had been in the hospital so many times, and each time it was like, is this it? Is this it? Is this it? There were times that he had to be taken to the hospital from home in an ambulance, and I would get phone calls from work and I would rush over there. It was like constantly holding your breath. I would tell my parents that I would get nervous when they would call me or send me a text because I didn't know if that was going to be the notification that he had passed. And he had cardiomyopathy with his heart, and I mean, his body had been shutting down for a while. And he had gone into the hospital in December of 2013, which was my sister's birthday. And it didn't look good. And I'm not a very religious or spiritual person, but I just said, please not on my sister's birthday. Just please, 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 please. And he made it. So thank you. Because I didn't want my sister to carry that with her. So he went back into the hospital at some point in January of 2014. And he had a very positive attitude. He was still talking, although we had to turn the vent down so that he could talk, but he was still talking, still had a sense of humor. And remember the night before he died, my whole family was at the hospital. And it was just another day. And his heart, I'd gotten a call earlier that day that his heart had stopped. So I rushed to the hospital. I do not remember the drive there. And I rushed up there and he was okay. And Aaron kept saying, I'm not worried about anything. Why should you guys be worried? And so we just tried to adopt his attitude that everything was going to be okay. And then later that night, we were still there. The the doctor came in. I don't know who she was. I had never seen her before. But she came in and said in front of him that she was worried, or she said she's pretty sure that you're not going to make it through the night. And that was just such a shock to hear that. And I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay there. And we started making phone calls to friends and family. So that my brother could say goodbye. And the cousins and uncles and aunts all came to the hospital, and Aaron's first occupational therapist that he had when he was first diagnosed came to the hospital. We were still very close with him and his family. And Aaron seemed fine that night. He was talking, he was laughing, he wanted to watch TV. So I went home. And I went to work the next day, and I was only going to work a half day and then go to the hospital to see him. And then I got a call from my dad that I had to come to the hospital. He didn't say anything else. So I rushed over to the hospital, and I had this feeling. And I got to the elevator, and the elevator was full of people, and he was up on the 8th floor. And I said, I didn't have the words to say to people, just let me get to the 8th floor. And so instead, I ran up the stairs. I ran up 8 flights of stairs, and ran into a friend of the family who was the massage therapist named Linda. And she didn't say anything. She just gave me a hug, and I knew. And then I went back into his room, and my world had changed. And then I, after a few minutes, had to suck it up, and I called my siblings and said, you need to come to the hospital. And I hung up the phone, and my mom said, how did you do that? I said, because I have to. And I think that was just the older sister in me having to protect them like my dad did when he called and not say anything. And that day was awful. So it's been 7.5 years since Aaron left us. And I have chosen to honor him in different ways every single year. And I think that's important to do, to celebrate him, because there were so many good memories, some not so good memories, but mostly good ones. And I choose to celebrate him every year. I did choose, against my mother's desire, did get a memorial tattoo for my brother.
Wow.
What did you get?
I can send a picture, but it's on my right shoulder, and he always thought that he was Batman growing up. And his favorite Batman movie was the original in 1989 with Michael Keaton. So I got that outline of the Batman symbol, and I have a thing with monarch butterflies, and to me they're perfect and represent so many good things. So I had the bat signal filled in as if it were a monarch butterfly.
Oh wow, you definitely need to send me a picture of that.
And you know, I got it almost a year after he passed, within the month. And my mother almost fainted because she was so mad. But it was done, and it was something that I wanted, and I I always told him that I would have his back. And with getting the tattoo, I always feel like he is mine.
Wow.
I got it, yeah. But every year on his birthday, which is July 24th, I've gotten my family a birthday present for Aaron and given it to them. Gosh, what have we done? We've made, my husband and I have made tables with old Batman comics and did an epoxy over them so they could have usable tables with Batman, and his favorite color was orange, so as an orange background. We've done a bunch of silly things. This past year, I found on Instagram, there was an ad for those, the cutouts in the shape of a body or a person. So I found one that had the Batman costume on, and I had his face, my brother's face put on it, and it was hysterical.
I love it.
So just try to get lighthearted presents to celebrate him and things that he would get a kick out of.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful. And I guess having lived the Duchenne journey, your own part of the Duchenne journey, is there any advice that you'd give to maybe someone who's got a young family with Duchenne siblings, so, you know, someone with Duchenne and siblings who don't have Duchenne?
Yeah. And I've lived that perspective as a sibling, as a daughter. I've lived it as a service provider, which is what I do for a living now, supporting families who have either themselves or their kids have a developmental disability. It's always important, no matter where you are in the journey, to just live the day and enjoy it and try not to focus on the next day or the day after that, and to really just live in the moment, because you're never going to have that day again. There's going to be hard times. There's going to be easy times. You're going to meet people along the way who are in your corner. You're going to learn that there's people in your circle that you need to cut out for various reasons. And it's okay. It's okay to do that. It's hard to do it, but sometimes you have to do what's best for your family and your situation. And for the siblings, you guys matter. I think sometimes siblings get forgotten and we're almost seen as not important sometimes, but our place in the family on this Duchenne journey is very unique. You provide an interesting perspective. Your relationship with your sibling with Duchenne is unique and interesting. And it's super easy to feel like you're alone and you're the only sibling going through this and that no one else will understand. I certainly felt like that when I was 10. And then I met someone who had a brother with Duchenne, and I finally felt like I had a real friend who understood me. So always know that you're not alone, and you can always come to this group for support, no matter what your age. We've all been there, and we promise to support you.
Shayla, thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
You're welcome. And I have to say, I haven't shared part of this story before, ever. So thank you for fostering an environment that was comfortable enough and safe enough to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you so much.